Hello, everyone. My name is Will Burns, and I am the president of the Association of Environmental Studies and Sciences, ACE. And on behalf of ACE members and our board, I'd like to welcome you to this quarterly installment of our webinar series, which primarily focuses on articles that are published in our journal, the Journal of Environmental Studies and Sciences, or JES, which is a publication of Springer. And this webinar will focus on the first of our new forum series articles, which provide a point-counterpoint analysis of critical interdisciplinary environmental issues. And we're extremely pleased to have two of the authors of those pieces here today to discuss a really critical issue, which is what are the appropriate instruments to try to meaningfully stanch the ever-burgeoning levels of greenhouse gas emissions that society faces today. As we know from the Working Group 3 report that was released over the course of the last couple of days, greenhouse gas emissions continue to rise at levels that are almost at the very top of the worst-case scenarios that the IPCC has outlined over the course of both the 4th assessment report and the 5th assessment report. And so it continues to beg the question of whether the approach that we're taking is appropriate and ultimately can be effective. And the articles that we focus upon today and the presentations that have grown out of those articles look at two different approaches, not necessarily clashing, but different approaches to addressing climate change. The role of market-based mechanisms, most specifically carbon taxes, and the role of more regulatory-oriented instruments, including energy efficiency mandates and efforts to induce, through other mechanisms, enhanced energy efficiency as a means of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And so a little bit about logistics for the webinar, and then I will introduce our speakers. I would encourage everyone that has questions to send them to everyone via the chat box here. What I will do at the end is I will scroll through them and try to draw out as many of them as I can for the speakers to address today. And with that, I'd like to introduce our two speakers, and we will proceed with the webinar. Our first speaker will be Dallas Burtraw, who is the Darius Gaskin Senior Fellow and Associate Director of the Center for Climate and Electricity Policy at the think tank Resources for the Future. The primary focus of his work is incentive-based approaches for environmental regulation, including most relevant for today's discussion in the context of climate change policy, with a focus on the role of market-based mechanisms such as carbon taxes and cap and trade. His presentation will be followed by that of John Skip Laitner. Skip is a visiting fellow at the American Council for an Energy Efficiency Economy. His focus is on technology and behavioral characterizations of energy efficiency resources for use in energy and climate economic policy models. Skip is also the president-elect of the Association of Environmental Studies and Sciences. And so with that, I would like to turn the floor over to our first speaker, Dallas. The floor is yours, Dallas.
Okay, thank you everybody, and thank you for your patience on that. I am at Resources for the Future, which is a nonprofit research institution, and we do not take stands on specific policy proposals, but try to do research that elevates the overall quality of the policy debate. And this work is co-authored with Samantha Sikar here at Resources for the Future. And we are really, as Will introduced, we are addressing this question from the perspective of the efficiency advantages that economists want to assign to introducing a price on emissions, a price on carbon in order to achieve greenhouse gas reductions. The reasons that economists put advocate putting a price on carbon is that it provides a mechanism that can reach deep into the economy and affect behavioral decisions throughout the economy by giving people a signal about their carbon footprint through all aspects of their daily life and their economic activities. But as we've begun to see the breakout of an introduction of price on carbon through cap and trade programs and through the introduction of taxes in some jurisdictions, a new and challenging question has emerged, and really it's a new opportunity, which is to give some thought to how the asset value that's created by introducing a price on carbon should be distributed through the economy and to whom that value should accrue. So this next slide shows the general framework of the article we want to present. The atmosphere resources, the way economists want to think about the atmosphere resources, that it's a depletable resource and it's rivalrous. That is that how different people, different people do as they interact with the atmosphere affects others. And it's non-excludable. That is that I cannot directly stop someone else from using the atmosphere resource to either, for a variety of purposes. So these terms together define what economists want to call a common pool resource. A common pool resource, that's a metaphor that it does, in this case the title does a good job of explaining the problem. It's as though there's a pool, in this case it's not water but air, that's shared in common. Each of us can pollute it, each of us can use it, and it's a management or coordination problem. But the fact that we would identify this as a common pool resource begs a question of, does that mean that it's commonly owned? How is this resource to be managed, and who actually has access to it? The decision to introduce a price on carbon is one way to manage this resource, but that price introduces a scarcity, and with scarcity comes an economic value that is created. In the case of a tax, that value is manifest through revenues that are collected, and in the case of cap and trade programs, that value is the asset value of the allowances that are bought and sold in the market. Historically, in other cap and trade programs, such as the sulfur dioxide trading program, which is the first large program and is well known, associated with the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments, and in several other programs, this economic value was given away for free to encumbered emitters. This was called grandfathering. This approach worked fine for small-scale programs. The challenge we face in introducing a price on carbon is really one of scale. The pricing of carbon, the introduction of a price of carbon constitutes the largest federally enforced property right here in the United States since the opening of the Great American West. That is, in 2 centuries. This is the largest creation of a new property right. And so how that value is introduced into the economy and distributed through the economy has profound implications, not just for the management of the resource, but also for the structure of the social ecology that's going to take shape in the future. That is, who really owns these environmental resources, and how shall they be managed? This fundamental question, the movement away from grandfathering to something else, we frame as in 2 worldviews. One is that this atmosphere belongs to the state, and therefore access to this asset value is a problem for the state to manage. When I say the state, I mean government, government jurisdictions. A second view is that the atmosphere belongs to individuals collectively. It's owned in common, it belongs to individuals, and so the asset value really constitutes a payment for environmental services to those who own the resource. So to whom should the rent accrue? To either the state or to individuals collectively? Let me give you a picture to help imagine where we are at in terms of the general trend in history. We see a movement away from free allocation to incumbent firms to a payment for environmental services. This is a profound interest, and really I would like to see, I think economists in general would like to see cemented into our understanding of how to construct a market for environmental goods and services, because it's consistent with the polluter pays principle, and with it comes a number of advantageous distributional and efficiency consequences. So it's not as a squatter's rights type of perspective that is being held anymore, although that was sort of a point of departure for the early generation of market-based programs. Now we see that they're taking shape as payment for environmental services, and that is consistent with the polluter pays principle. So if the carbon price is a payment for access to the atmosphere resources, a payment for environmental services, and this is the new paradigm, then the fundamental question is, should that revenue go to government? And if it were to go to government, then you could view this as the government is managing a resource, and the value for access to that resource can become the revenue essentially from an auction of emission allowances or from a tax, can become part of the government's fiscal problem. It can use this to reduce other pre-existing taxes. It could use it for earmarked programs. It could spend it on education or other valuable social programs. This view has one compelling attribute. Economists will point to this approach, especially the role of tax swaps and using it to reduce pre-existing taxes, as having a strong advantage in terms of promoting economic growth. So while introducing any new kind of tax on goods and services in the economy might tend to slow economic growth, and that's always a consideration in environmental regulation, if you use revenue that's collected to reduce pre-existing taxes, that can cause a bounce back and enhance economic growth because you're reducing taxes on things we want more of, like investment or labor. The second view is that this payment should accrue fundamentally to individuals as owners of the resource, owners of a common pool resource. In this case, PES, the payment for environmental services, could be in the form of per capita payments, such as climate dividends, or investments in energy efficiency or R&D that directly accrue to the benefit of owners of the resource. Probably the main advantage here is not efficiency, but procedural equity. This type of an approach, many have observed, would be politically reinforcing, that households that might be receiving payments for environmental services here, they would like that very much. It becomes a popular mechanism. The check you're getting from the government makes climate policy a popular thing, and also provides an opportunity to nudge households, to encourage them to use the dividends that they're receiving to make further investments on their own to reduce their carbon footprint. So we're framing this as two worldviews, and we don't reach a fundamental conclusion about which one should prevail, but really make the observation that there's been a historic shift in the paradigm away from giving away this valuable asset for free to incumbent polluters and considering it as a payment for environmental services. And we then look across the portfolio of programs that are in place and wonder, well, what decisions are the current programs implementing? What does it look like in terms of payment for environmental services compared to the old-fashioned grandfathering approach? And in this realm, is the fundamental philosophy of the programs that this atmosphere resource is the property of government or the property of individuals? Well, here we show you a survey of 6 prominent programs that have introduced a price on carbon. I should draw, of course, special attention to Australia, which shows here their indicated and explicit design for introducing a price on carbon that has now, with the elections last year, has now been frozen. Those programs have not yet been retracted, but the political wind is out of those sails, and they're unlikely to come to fruition in their current form. So what actually comes to take shape in Australia remains to be seen. But nonetheless, this is the program design that's in place, and this shows the value of payments for environmental services, and these are not all of the total asset value that's created from introducing a price on carbon, but across these different programs, we see that 5 to 90% of the total asset value that's created has been directed to what we would call payment for environmental services. So this goes to show we're in the realm here of billions of dollars, and that's just the portion that's going to payment for environmental services. But the trend is very clear that that payment is moving increasingly towards payment for environmental services and away from giving this allowance value for free to incumbent firms. This next slide, and I do understand these slides are going to be available to you at the end of this webinar, so you can look at these results yourself at your own leisure, and also they're available in the manuscript that's been published. Here we look at how funds have been used in these different programs, that portion of funds that that are constituted payment for environmental services. So we see in different programs different approaches. In California, in the lower left, for example, in 2013, nearly half of the value that's created by introducing a price on carbon is being returned to households as dividends. That's being accomplished through the electricity sector. There's also a large fraction that's being spent on energy efficiency, and a portion that's going to research and development. Just so you understand what we're displaying here, this does not include that portion of allowance value in California, for example, that is being given away for free to firms. This shows how the portion that's going to payment for environmental services is being distributed. And in 2015, this picture for California, for example, will change dramatically as transportation fuels enter the program, and it's expected that allowances associated with transportation would all be auctioned, creating really quadrupling the size of the program in terms of asset value, and all that value is expected to fall into this category of payments for environmental services. I also want to draw your attention to Germany, and we use Germany as a proxy for the European Union generally, where in the electricity sector beginning in 2013, they have moved away from mandating that no more than 10% of the emission allowances be auctioned to a philosophical approach that 100% of the allowances should be auctioned for the electricity sector, and that is rolling out over all of the EU over the course of this decade. And regional greenhouse gas initiative in the Northeast states, where over 90%, virtually 100% of the allowances are auctioned, and this pie here for RGGI represents almost all of the asset value that's created in that program. And you can see how these allowance values are being used in different ways. So, to move to a conclusion, we observe a changing paradigm that's really historic. Really, most did not anticipate. I can't really pause and provide enough emphasis for the fact that the way people think about emissions trading programs or carbon taxes or environmental pricing in general there's been a sea change over the last 15 years, and in my mind the sea change is wholly advantageous and wholly a step in the right direction in the movement away from grandfathering towards the concept of payment for environmental services. But this opens up a whole new question that really becomes philosophical, deeply philosophical, I think, in practice, which is to whom should the payment for environmental services accrue? One view is that the atmosphere resource is the property of the state. The payments can be used at the government's discretion. The government, economists want to think that the government is going to act in such a way that's efficiency enhancing. Or the alternative is the payments can be the property of individuals, and individuals have a claim to PES as a compensation as owners of the resource. In one case, the choice would be driven by considerations of efficiency. In the other case, the choice would be driven by a policy process. And finally, we want to close with the thought that I'm only framing this in the context of the U.S. borders. If one begins to look beyond the U.S. borders, one might ask, well, what about internationally? Internationally, what would constitute payment for environmental services, and to whom should they accrue? This gets into a dicey question that's one for the future, which is the realm for payments between governments. But we would observe that while there's some philosophical grounding for that, property rights can only be defined and secure within a common legal framework, and so without an international agreement securing each country's rights to the atmosphere, it's not really possible to anticipate what global redistribution of revenues might entail. But within a national government, this is a really meaningful question that's, I think, at the forefront of how policy is going to take shape in the future. So that wraps up a brief introduction to our article, and I am now going to turn this back over.
Well, hello everyone. This is Skip Laitner. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you, Dallas, for that really nice introduction, and Will for the invitation to participate. And in the few minutes I have with you here today, how to think about my talk and the comments I have to offer. My point of departure is actually Jim Hansen's very compelling book about the coming climate storms of our grandchildren. And indeed, if we step back and pay attention, I think we'll agree the climate is already beginning to speak to us quite loudly. At the same time, however, there is also a compelling bit of evidence to suggest a much less robust economy over the long term, one that is being weakened by the very same reason our climate is now imperiled, namely the hugely inefficient use of energy and other resources. So for that reason, I think we need to think about a new book titled, which I would suggest, The Climate and the Economic Storms of Our Grandchildren. In other words, yes, I absolutely agree with Hansen's diagnosis of the emerging climate storm. In fact, I think we need to be thinking below 350 parts per million, perhaps even below 300 parts per million. It is that big and that immediate of a response that will be warranted over the next couple of decades. The bad news is we also need to take very large steps to bolster an unsustainable economy. Yes, on the climate diagnosis, but we absolutely need to think about a better remedy. Hansen proposes that we increase the price of carbon so that fossil fuels remain in the ground. I suggest that yes, prices matter, but they are not all that matter. There are many other ways to provide both the right set of signals, prices and otherwise, and the right mix of incentives that move us to a smarter set of climate, social, economic policies. How to think about this? I'm also suggesting that we think in the spirit and the tradition of Nobel laureate and former Caltech physicist Richard Feynman. He gave a remarkable talk I first read in the mid-90s, all the way back in 1959, a visionary talk, plenty of room at the bottom. He was imagining in 1959 the ability to store the entire Encyclopedia Britannica on the head of a pen. This was 30 years before IBM scientist Don Eigler learned how to manipulate cesium atoms under a microscope to spell out the words IBM. A remarkable talk, and he's suggesting that there is indeed more space, more frontier, more opportunity to operate, better opportunity to think bigger than we imagine. I've provided the website for his really interesting talk. Although an award-winning physicist, not a single equation, there's no reason for anyone not to read this really brilliant essay all the way back to 1959. But that said, let me offer a couple of opening perspectives. The employment benefits and the economic returns that we're now seeing are diminishing. This is on the current generation of technologies and the social market institutions, what my colleague Jeremy Rifkin might call the second industrial revolution technology. Yes, they return some profits, but the ability to generate returns are diminishing. My own research suggests a major reason for those diminishing returns and the growing climate burden is the hugely inefficient use of energy and other resources. This in turn creates an array of costs that absolutely impose a constraint and erodes the economic process. Clearly needed, I suggest a social and economic transformation such as the one now developing in northern France, and I'll talk about that in just a few minutes. But a transformation driven by what I call large-scale purposeful effort that includes both directed actions and targeted investments in the human and physical capital so that we promote greater, much greater levels of energy efficiency and overall gains in productivity. There's good news and bad news on the efficiency research. Building on the work of my colleague Bob Ayers, many of you may know his name, Robert Ayers, as one of the godfathers of industrial ecology. His work and others, the evidence suggests that the U.S. now wastes 86% of all the energy it consumes. In other words, all the energy we throw at the economic process, perhaps 14% of it is useful in converting matter into the goods and services and distributing them in the way we want. Australia may be about the same. Europe and Japan perhaps marginally better at 80 to 82%, but not very good at all. Neither that level of waste nor the foundations of a fossil fuel energy system I suggest, are sufficient to ensure either a robust economy or a healthy climate. The good news, we can cut the waste of energy consumption in half in ways that provide and improve the prospect for a healthy climate and also to bolster jobs and a more robust, more sustainable economy. Or as two colleagues of mine, quick sketch artists from Germany, in a talk I gave last year in Zurich, I love the way they captured this. We imagine 86% of the energy wasted, and if we are the 14% small figure, imagine trying to carry around the 86% waste. It absolutely hobbles us. It slows our ability to be nimble and agile and to be productive, and I think that is what is facing us in many ways. Turning to John Wheeler, many may not know of this name, but this is John Wheeler, who died some years ago, professor emeritus at Princeton University, also a professor of Richard Feynman. You may know him actually by his popularization of the term black hole and for the coining the terms quantum foam and wormhole. In the 1970s, I remember his responding to questions from reporters asking how the heck are people coming up with such interesting ideas as quantum mechanics and the like, and he said simply, we shape the world by the questions we ask, and my suggestion is the need to ask much better questions. I'm suggesting that we may be living more by waste than ingenuity. We are operating at what I would suggest is a 14% energy inefficiency, and that view of the world, a 1980s view of technology and opportunity, may actually constrain the conventional assumptions about the efficiency potential. In other words, we tend to see it in a very limited way, but in the spirit of Richard Feynman, we might explore the full efficiency potential. My colleagues at ACEEE and I have suggested that there may be as much as 250 billion barrels of oil equivalent for the United States through the year 2050. That could be sufficient to reduce total consumption by half. And I've provided the citation for that study, the long-term energy efficiency potential, out in 2012. Very big opportunity if we step back and ask the right questions. But how might efficiency change our assumptions about what are the costs, what are the prices that we need to shift thinking? Here I'm going to be looking at a study my colleagues and I did in 2009 at the Waxman-Markey analysis. A very cumbersome bill, admittedly. It could be streamlined and improved, yet it provides a way forward. And I'm looking at four parameters, or four metrics: the carbon price, energy savings, the energy price, energy expenditures, across 6 different cases, and to see how that begins to change the dynamics. The first case, I don't think we'll ever see happen, but it's what I call the big tech, big price approach. And if we rely on big supply like carbon capture, big renewables, big nuclear, what have you, we may need a very high price of carbon, and that obviously increases total costs of energy expenditures. We're not going to see it because the innovation will kick in, but I highlight that as a starting point to understand the dynamic of how these models might look. The second case I call big tech, little policy. The same approach as in case 1, but we're now beginning to increase the amount of current program funding for efficiency, R&D, and other kinds of programs. Prices beginning to come down for carbon, and as you imagine, the energy expenditures also begin to drop, particularly as energy savings begins to kick in a little bit bigger, and we do not see quite as big of a price increase for energy resources. The basic case, case number 3, is the Waxman-Markey, what we call the basic energy efficiency. This is the benchmark that we allude to. We're suggesting that, yes, there is a need for a carbon price, about $239. But at this point, we're beginning to see a decrease in total energy expenditures because of the large energy savings that begin to kick in with greater policies. Case 4, Waxman-Markey with enhanced efficiency. The carbon price comes down. The energy expenditures go even bigger in the way of net savings over time. Case 5, the optimal efficiency that we might be able to imagine pursuing, like our colleagues suggested in our 2012 study. Price comes down, energy expenditures decrease, and then finally, as we begin to imagine a shift in behavior, a shift in the energy culture, the way we see the opportunities unfolding, much smaller prices may be needed with a much significantly reduced set of energy expenditures. It's that kind of thinking that we need to jump to. So let me offer one thought on what I call the tough choices ahead, drawing from work of my colleague Jeff Luke, who unfortunately died prematurely some years ago. But he wrote a very interesting book in 1998 anticipating much of what he called catalytic leadership. strategies for an interconnected world. He notes individuals have a natural tendency to choose from what he calls an impoverished option bag. Cognitive research in problem solving shows that individuals usually generate only about 30% of the total number of potential options on simple problems, and that on average individuals miss about 70 to 80% of the potential high quality alternatives. I think that merits a step back and think, are we limiting our choices ahead? Are others acting in these ideas? Well, as I've already said, in northern France, consider Nord-Pas-de-Calais, a former coal mining and still very heavy manufacturing region of about 4 million people in northeastern France. You can think of this along the Belgian border and up along the English Channel. Working with my colleague Jeremy Rifkin and our partners in the Paris office of Accenture, we developed a master plan for what we call the third industrial revolution that we think can indeed reduce total energy use in that region by half by 2050. All remaining energy needs will be provided by renewable resources also by 2050. If my numbers be believed, we're suggesting that there will be necessary an annual upgrade in investment on the order of €6 billion a year over the next 36 years. That's about $300 billion cumulatively. Very big deal. But our modeling also suggests that employment will grow annually, reaching as many as 165,000 net jobs by 2050, 100,000 on average over the entire time horizon, so rising to as many as 165,000 net. Because we have a more robust economy, we're moving away from capital-intensive, non-labor-intensive economic activities as energy might be embedded. The master plan, I'm delighted to say, was formally accepted and delivered to and unanimously accepted by the Nord-Pas-de-Calais Chamber of Commerce, headed up by a very liberal president and banker, Philippe Vasseur, who, working together with the socialist president of the regional council, Daniel Percheron, and together accepted that plan so that we are now beginning to work on a way forward. I hope we'll stay tuned to see how successful they are. That could point the way. So some concluding thoughts. Perhaps our ultimate economic and energy efficiency resource. I'm recalling the comment of early 20th century UK essayist Lionel Strachey 100 years ago remarked, and I think this is probably still true today, Americans guess because they're in too great a hurry to think. Or as Jerry Hirschberg, founder and former CEO of Nissan Design, noted that creativity is not an escape from disciplined thinking. It is an escape with disciplined thinking. And Henry Ford, in his book, Thinking is the Hardest Work There Is, which is the probable reason why so few people engage in it. Or my favorite American philosopher, Gary Larson from the Far Side cartoon. Apologies to parents in the audience. I am a dad as well. We have a couple of spiders who've woven a web across the bottom of a playground slide. If we pull this off, we'll eat like kings. I hate to think what the alternative might be. Or more formally, Maynard Keynes says the difficulty lies not with the new ideas, but in escaping the old ones. Or as my artist friends have highlighted, the difficulty absolutely is to escape the old ideas that will allow us, in the spirit of Richard Feynman, to grab onto the bigger opportunities and the bigger transformation that is needed at scale and in Chinatown. With that, I'll be happy to pass the ball back as well.
Well, I would like to thank everyone who has participated in the webinar, including the participants and also the speakers, Dallas and Skip. Thank you very much for your insights. As I've indicated before, the articles from which these remarks grew out of are available at the Journal of Environmental Studies and Sciences website, and also you can derive links for this from the Association of Environmental Studies and Sciences website, which is aess.info. Finally, I'd also like to invite all of you to ACE's annual meeting, which will take place this year at Pace University in New York from June 11th through the 14th. Additional information on the conference is also available at the ACE website, aess.info. Once again, thank you everyone for attending this meeting, and I hope everyone has a great weekend.